Well, we're standing at the dresser in the old family home, thatch cottage, that was built nearly 300 years ago. And the preservation order was put on it about 25 years ago.
And the house where we're standing, were you reared here?
I was, yes. And my great-grandparents, my grandparents and my parents, and now it's our generation that's here. I don't know where it's going to go in the future, because the whole area has become industrialised here, and there's a strong possibility we'll be forced out, that we will have to sell. You know, so.
That is a sad thought, isn't
it? It is, really. When you look back and you see from mixed farming in the past to the modernisation that has taken place in farming to date, and the amount of work that was done to build up a place, and then to find out that it can go very, very quickly, and you don't have much of a choice when places are rezoned for industrial development or whatever else they want to rezone it for.
And is that on your mind?
It is, yes.
God. Who was here before you again?
My parents were here before me, my grandparents and my great-grandparents.
And can you remember your great-grandparents' name?
My great-grandmother was Mary King, and my great-grandfather was John Burke from Athenry.
And then your own granny and granddad?
My grandmother, she came from a village called Rovahead, the far side of Clarence Bridge, and my grandfather was Pat Burke. And my father was Paddy Burke. He was in the Royal Air Force during World War II, and he came back and married my mother, who was a Margaret Carr, from the next parish, Oranmore, which is in the parish of Clare, Galway. And then they had us, so they were the past generations here. And now my brother Joe lives here, but I'm living next door, and I'm the one that is running and managing the place, and we're very uncertain about the future of it.
And this dresser then, as far as you know, that's been here since you were a baby?
Oh, this dresser was here going back to the very beginning, and that would be my great-grandmother's period. And the jugs, as you can see on the very top and on the bottom, they would have been given as presents filled with jam when there was a baby born, or an event in the family. Later on then, the little mugs were bought. They would be going back to the time that these mugs came out originally, and some of them would have come from America, and they were all presents really that were given to, say, my grandmother's period. I think the mugs would have come out, and maybe some of them were my great-grandmother, I'm not sure.
God.
And the old plates at the back, they would be going back to great-grandmother's period.
And little plates here, I see.
The two here now, they would be very old. I'd say that they could be going back either as a wedding present to my grandmother or my great-grandmother.
God. And tell me this, the dresser was painted years ago?
There was hundreds of coats of brown, heavy brown paint on that dresser. And about nearly 30 years ago, the house went on fire here, the roof went on fire. And when it did, the fire brigade came in, and they actually did a lot of damage. So when the back of the dresser got damaged with water damage, and I decided at that stage to have the paint stripped, and I took it to a place in Gort where there was an acid bath, and we got all the paint off it, and eventually got it kind of French varnished, and that's the way it's been ever since.
Lovely. And it would have been that same kind of brownness on the doors here?
The same on the doors, yeah, and the ceiling as well would have been the same.
And I can't help but notice, you were telling me before we went on camera, the little loft upstairs.
Yeah, in the earlier generations, the family would have been reared, the boys would have been up there, and there would have been a settle bed here in the kitchen that the girls would have slept in, and the grandparents slept behind, or the parents slept behind the fireplace in that bedroom. And in later times then, as the family moved away and went abroad to America and Australia and places like that, there was shortage of labour, so the spailpíns were brought in to do the work. and they would have slept up there. They didn't have any English, and in my mother's time, going back in the 60s, she had brilliant Irish because she was taught by a Martin Kine, who was a very famous teacher in Galway at the time, and there's books, he wrote Connemara, that book, and there's plays made about that. So they were great friends, herself and himself, and she had brilliant Irish as the result of that. So she was well able to communicate with the spailpíns. They weren't able to read or write, and she would write the letters home for them and send the money home to their families. And also she would rip out old clothing like pants, coats and that, and she would turn the material inside out and make whatever clothes for the kids and send parcels out. She also would take the wool when the sheep were sheared, because it was mixed farming in those days, and she would dye the wool and dry it out in the bushes, and she would do fair isle knitting. And in later years she had a machine, so she was big into knitting and sewing and designing stuff, but she only did it for friends, people that asked her, and the family. And she herself and her sisters, they were very, very talented in that line. So it was something that was handed down to myself as well. I was into that, sewing and knitting, and I used to make costumes for the tops of the town, and I made wedding dresses and wedding cakes, but it wasn't my professional background. It's just I did it for having an interest. I had an interest in it more than anything. But I think it was in us. We were reared in that period where we had to do things like that.
Do you remember the top coats at the end of the bed?
I do indeed. The heavy coats over the woolen blankets. We used to bring the wool into the woolen mills in Galway and get the blankets made up. And there was a connection, I think, on my mother's side of the family and the owner of the woolen mills. So there was all these type of situations, no more than there was with filling the tea chest with eggs and homemade butter and bringing it up in the horse and trap to the train station, which was just up the road here in those days from us, and bringing it into Eyre Square, having it collected there and brought down to where not far from the Spanish Arch area of Galway, the streets there, and it would be replaced with tea and sugar and flour and all the things. So it was a barter system, no money changed hands. And I was reared, as a young child, I was reared with that. And then later on we had the travelling shop come around before the supermarkets. And the modernisation we have now.
And tell me this, do you ever remember posting a turkey over to England?
Regularly, and not only that, but I killed them, plucked them and singed them, and we did the sealing wax on the packets, the packaging going over, and that was done for particularly my mother's 3 sisters that were in Birmingham, and for my father's family that were in London.
You tell people that now, they wouldn't believe you.
Yeah, and we used to separate the milk. We had a separator here, separate the cream and the milk from the milk, and feed the skim milk to the pigs and the sows and that, and we'd make the butter from the cream. And it was very much mixed farming, that type of farming. I remember there was no electricity in the house, there was no running water. In the 60s, my father organised a local group of they brought the water down from Oranmore, dug the road the whole way down and connected it to all the houses in the village, and that was in the 60s. But we used to kill all our own fowl regularly here, turkeys, geese, ducks, chickens and that, hens. And that was regular up until the big supermarkets came in, and then everything became too convenient. But then there wasn't the same workforce either, because the families were much smaller to carry on, So things changed. Then my father got into the dairy business, and we had to get rid of fowl because they were so afraid of disease in cows and he was one of the first people in the area, with a man called Dr. Lydon and another man called Johnny Burke up the Mary Road, to buy the first silage harvester in the area. And in those days, the farm advisors brought the buses around here to see modern farming taking place for the young lads that were in college at the time, to see the type of modern farming that was taking place.
The silage came and the cocks of hay went to the...
They did, well, they did, we used to have the cocks of hay, and we used to make the ropes and everything.
Did you? Yeah.
I still have the stones here, and I must get them erected as a sample of what took place. I never did that, but the stone is still here. Yeah. And there's a lot of things, I suppose, in the sheds, the old stuff as well.
Do you ever remember the hay bogey for lifting the cocks of hay?
Oh yes, I think there's one around all the time, and we had the traps for going to mass and that.
And did you remember the first tractor coming?
I do. It was a Massey 135, the first one, and I remember my father, he had a group of men in here. The hay barn was turned into a silage pit. The walls were done, and at the front of it, where the opening was, there was railway sleepers put along at a very height, and at the back he built a ramp. And when the silage was up over the walls and sorry, there's a tractor just going by. The railway sleepers, you'd go up the ramp and you'd roll it, because you'd have to spread it out and roll it. And there was one occasion they came into the lunch here during the day, and Helen took the tractor, went up the ramp and was rolling, and he heard me and he came out. And I was only a kid at the time. He says, like a good little girl, he says, come down. So I'd been rolling away, not thinking of the consequences. And when I got down, he says, if you ever get up on that tractor again, I'll break your arse, he says, with a kick. There was no brakes on the tractor, and I rolling 2 foot above the walls and the sleepers. But I was a tomboy as a youngster growing up, and anything that moved, I was on it.
And I hear were you the first woman to drive?
I was the first woman to get an Arctic licence, and I was the second woman to get a rigid licence in the country, the first one outside of Dublin. And then I did a little bit of flying, not a lot. I never got a pilot's licence, but I was very interested. I think it was too late in life when I started, and I had to take over the farm, and with the level of responsibility and time for work, there was no time to fit in a social life after that. Prior to that, everything went from rallying to hill climbing, whatever we did.
Rallying?
Yeah, we were into that, my husband and myself, So we had a lot of fun for a number of years. We still have the cars, but I don't get involved anymore.
And your first episode was on a 135, was it?
It was.
With no brakes.
And the second episode was on a Honda 50. So that was kind of the lifestyle. I had 2 brothers, and they mainly went to England and worked there in the buildings. My father was hard to get along with, so they weren't really that interested in farming for that reason. But possibly, if things were different, if there was a different relationship there, it might have worked out different for them. That's the reason I'm involved here now. I lived in the city for a short while, and I came back here to look after them when they were getting older, and got involved in taking over and doing the work. And
you want to keep this place the way you can remember it?
I tried, to try and keep things as they were. It's difficult enough to do it because things are changing all the time, and every generation wants to put their own stamp on things, but to try and bring it back, but at the same time it has to be livable too, and that's where we're at now with it.
Thanks many for your time, Helen.
You're very welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come here and do this with us.
da da di 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 da di